Good morning. Welcome to another edition of the CannaList Conversation. We are here today with Omar Figueroa. Um, uh, he is a graduate of Stanford Law School, has been practicing for 20 some odd years, did a stint at Yale and Wharton. I guess you want to make sure you get all the big names thrown in there. He is also a director of the National Cannabis Industry Association. He works with the Cannabis Tourism International and the Ganjier Circle, which I'm hoping he will explain those organizations and what they do in detail. Good morning, sir. How are you?
I am most excellent. How are you?
I'm good, good, always good. So tell us a little bit about the national cannabis industry and what they're focused on these days.
It's uh, the it's the largest trade association in the United States, and right now it's focused on federal legalization and changing the federal landscape. They're lobbying for the small cannabis businesses across the U.S. To try to come up with workable federal regulations and also to repeal federal cannabis prohibition, which is the number one step, is descheduling cannabis so that it's no longer Schedule 1. And once that happens, there's going to be all sorts of cascading effects. But the most important thing, I think, initially is as a trade association for licensed cannabis businesses across the United States to work together, for their mutual benefit.
And obviously, we've been hearing about the the Senate proposals, and we get really close, and then it never goes anywhere. Are we going to see the Banking Act before we see the Federal Act? What's your sense of where things are going to go and the timing, if any?
Yeah, my
Crystal
sense,
ball, right?
yeah, it's very variable because the information is always changing, and at this particular juncture, I think we will see safe banking before we see comprehensive federal reform. And it just looks like the banking lobbyists are indefatigable and well funded and have not given up. So looks like safe banking may make it through. And once that happens, I think there's going to be beneficial effects in all of the security concerns about having to deal with a large amount of cash are going to be alleviated by the ability to bank. It's going to streamline payroll and tax paying. A lot of other effects will be the ability to get loans and financial services. So if safe banking passes, that will have like quite a number of cascading effects. It's going to make it easier for bankers to start thinking about cannabis, and you'll see all sorts of innovative financial products that are cannabis related. And it will also be wind in the sails for broader reform efforts. So I do hope safe banking makes it through. At this point, with the senators saying that they're going to look at cannabis and introduce a bill sometime in August, near the end of the congressional term, to me does not bode well, because if it's going to be introduced near the end of the congressional term, it's going to be difficult to just get it right through at the last moment if there's concerted opposition or lack of support, because they're going to need 60 votes to get it through the Senate, and I don't see that happening unless there's significant change. I think those significant changes happen in, right before the end of the congressional session.
Yeah, they're going to throw it in at the end and say, so this way they can say they tried.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
That could be, I agree with that analysis. And you talk to a lot of very intelligent people on this podcast. So I think your sense is aggregated from many intelligent people. And
Yeah, I mean, from what we hear, the biggest challenge is, I mean, the reason why the federal level is so important, or at least the declassification, is because of the tax implications. So that folks can write off cost of sale and just make it a reasonable margin.
yeah.
Speaking of reasonable, let's talk about California first, right? So in the last 6 months, we've been hearing all kinds of grumblings about how difficult an environment California is at this point, that the tax rates are onerous, the sin taxes, all those types of things. So what's going on in California right now?
Well, in California, there's a very struggling cannabis industry, and it's also the unregulated market that is struggling. So the entire cannabis sector is under severe stress. I think it's going to be characterized in the future as an extinction event. I even hear of many old-time growers in Humboldt County who are transitioning from what used to be the cannabis market, and now they're just going to go back to becoming carpenters or electricians or doing other types of manual labor that are much more lucrative than cannabis these days. It's just turning out that the market in California is struggling at both levels. At the regulated level, the 280E, but state on top of local taxes, and we have two types of state taxes: the cultivation tax and the excise tax. And on top of that, the local jurisdictions added their own little local tax for the privilege of operating at the local level. And so the California system is really like a case study in how taxes prop up an unregulated market. And
kill an
how
industry, right?
Yeah, basically high taxation, creates an uncompetitive marketplace where consumers, really have no incentive other than laboratory testing to go to the regulated market, because it's just as expensive as it was in the old, so-called black market days to buy cannabis. I can't believe that the price of cannabis is still roughly $50 an eighth, which is the price what it was before Proposition 64 passed in November 2016. So that to me speaks of how many regulators saw cannabis as basically a piggy bank that they could continuously take the eggs from the golden goose and not deplete it. And it seems like now they're depleting the golden goose. The golden goose is laying and laying fewer golden eggs because it's not being put in a healthy environment. A lot of this will change with 280E reform. That's not the entire solution. I think at the state level, we have to see an expansion of retail, also direct-to-consumer sales from farmers to consumers at farmers markets. I think that's a huge thing, because once the consumers can get it without too many intermediaries. There's always going to be intermediaries. The cannabis needs to be transported to the farmers market by licensed distributors, and it needs to go through licensed testing laboratories. So all of that would not change under the legislative proposals in California, but we could end up seeing direct-to-consumer sales opening up in California, which I think would be a lifeline to the craft cultivators who grow the ultra-premium cannabis that people across the world deserve access to.
Yeah, but the irony is the direct-to-consumer wouldn't be direct-to-consumer, from the farmer to transportation back to the farmer to then to the consumer, right? So
That's
it's not
right.
even direct-to-consumer, and it's just ridiculous.
Yes, and it's really like a concession to this mandatory distribution system that was put in. Before, back in the collective and cooperative days, before we had this highly regulated system, it truly was direct to consumer. It was pretty unregulated. So there was a lot of lack of testing, and a lot of really noxious pesticides were used on cannabis, and nobody knew any better. So
well,
I would say that
direct to your local consumer. You got distributor, right?
That's right. And there was yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, does this, suggest that the only way to survive this is going to be through big cannabis? And will we just, will this kill the small market, or will the craft market survive?
I think the ultra premium craft market will survive, looking at how ultra premium cannabis is being defined. For example, the Ganjier program, of which I'm a member of the founding circle, we really educate people about the value of terpenes and sun-grown cannabis and the full expression of the plant. You can't just judge quality based on potency alone. If you were to do that for alcohol, for wine, you'd be choosing fortified wine and the most potent wine. It's not about it. The experience is not about maximizing THC intake. It's about really,
otherwise we'd all be drinking Everclear, right?
That's right, exactly.
Exactly, yeah.
And so, so much of the experience is sensory, and it's terpene based, and that's becoming to be more widely accepted. And it turns out that plants that are grown in the sun and exposed to the full range of environmental conditions tend to have much richer terpene profiles, because they're not like these hothouse flowers that,
That are
can't really
forced.
take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. How did you get, you've been a lawyer for a while. So how did you get into the cannabis space as a lawyer?
When I was in law school, I went to Stanford Law School, and we had like the most prominent legal minds come to talk to us, like Supreme Court justices Antonin Scalia and Sandra Day O'Connor and all of these like famous corporate lawyers. And then one day, an old hippie lawyer with long white hair and a ponytail named Tony Serra came to campus. And his speech was, for me, the most inspiring speech. Like he said, there's two types of lawyers in the world. There's like lawyers who fight about money and lawyers who fight for freedom. Which type of lawyer do you want to be? And so at that point, I was like young, idealistic, had just graduated from college, had been a philosophy major at Yale, believed in like, the Platonic ideals of like, the highest form of human seeks the truth. And then after that, the next highest seeks fame. And then after that, the lowest form of human just seek wealth, right? And so I was like thinking like I wanted to aspire to something more than mere wealth at that point. And so Tony Serra said there's two types of lawyers in the world. I was like, man, I want to be a freedom lawyer. And so during law school, I worked at the federal public defender. And my reason was really like, I wanted to represent human beings. I didn't want to be representing these corporations that have no soul, that are accorded personhood by the legal system, but I wanted to represent human beings with souls. And so for a large part of my career, a couple decades, I was a freedom defense lawyer specializing in cannabis cases. And the reason I focused on cannabis is because it was the best way to get the best cannabis in Northern California. The growers would always save the very best for themselves. That was known as the head stash, and their lawyer. And so I learned it was access to head stash, basically. And that's why I focus on
representing. Very noble of you.
Well, it was kind of like selfish, but it was more like pursue your passions. And so, I have undiminished enthusiasm for cannabis and for the practice of law. And I thank me pursuing my passions. And so that's taken me to many interesting places. Like I've gotten to speak at, say, Spanibus in Barcelona, or, to be involved in this Ganjier project. And I got to meet a lot of like the people I looked up to in the cannabis world, like, Master Cultivator Mel Frank or Master Hashashin Frenchy Canoli, or, I got to hang out with, people that are very interesting, at least to me. And so...
And then as a result of all these travels, you're now involved with the Cannabis Tourism International. Tell us about that.
Yes, so I'm a director of the Cannabis Travel Association International, which is the first trade association relating to cannabis travel. We started as a California-based organization, but there's been so much interest that we've expanded internationally. And basically, the members are looking at cannabis tourism. Like basically, the travel industry did a lot of research during COVID because they're trying to figure out, what to do next once people start traveling again. And they realized that some of the activities that people want to do, like one of the main activities is use cannabis on vacation. Right. Makes sense. People are on vacation, they don't have the responsibilities of everyday life, and they want to experiment with cannabis. So a lot of travel providers are now thinking, how do they incorporate cannabis, or maybe as a half step, how do they incorporate CBD into the travel experience? Because they know that a lot of travelers are are open to these cannabis experiences. At the same time, people who do cannabis travel, they're thinking like cannabis is an intensifier, and you can really provide incredible experiences. For example, some of these curated dining events I've been to, like that pair cannabis with fine wine and fine dining, and because cannabis does sharpen your appreciation for gustatory experiences, it's amazing. Like you can really have like increased enhancement of your meal and of the wine that accompanies your meal when paired with the right strains of cannabis. Of course, if people are taking couch lock strains that are going to knock them out, the event is just going to be like a catastrophe. But if people are taking something that kind of like intensifies their appreciation, cannabis is not just about cannabis. Cannabis, the future of cannabis travel is going to be where cannabis is kind of like an adjunct to the main experience. You're going to see cannabis yoga conferences and, cannabis writing workshops and cannabis, art and comedy conferences and all sorts of events. I can't wait to see a chocolate, cannabis, and coffee and comedy festival.
We also, we're starting to see more and more states come online. There's this expansion. And I know that you guys are focused on New York. What's going on in New York?
Yes, my law firm opened an office in Brooklyn, New York, and we have an attorney, Andrew Kingsdale, who is a member of the Cannabis Law Section, the head of the CBD and hemp part of the New York State Bar Association. And basically, we're writing about New York actively and providing legal services now. We have clients who are interested in obtaining some of these licenses that are coming out. And I think it's going to be very interesting because we have a lot of experience with all of these applications and we've been through it before. And so we can bring in all our old school experience that we have from the cannabis industry, best practices, into the New York market, where many of the lawyers, every law firm in the United States, I think, is establishing a cannabis practice group. And so many of them don't really have any experience or any credibility in the cannabis world. And so, we were getting calls from people saying, can you refer us to lawyers in New York? And we have a few colleagues from the International Cannabis Bar Association, of which I'm a founding member. But eventually we just decided, we can service our clients directly and combine like a lot of the experience from California, take it to New York. And also many for California clients are interested in New York, and many for New York clients are also interested in California because many of the MSOs have yet to crack the California code, but we are very well positioned to do that because we've been in California and we have just kind of level of insight that you can only get from like watching the whole industry grow up over time.
And then with the federalization, will that allow the multi-state operators to sell interstate or across lines?
It could. I mean, if cannabis were descheduled, I think we would see immediate interstate activity, and you would see California cannabis in New York, and the finest cannabis boutiques in Manhattan would be like extolling the virtues of sun-grown cannabis and getting into the appellations of origin, which is something that we're working on and we're very excited about, which are the world's first appellations of origin, which are part of California law, are soon going to be established. There's been a regulatory rulemaking process that is now completed, and we have finalized regulations in California for petitions to establish a new appellation of origin. And these are terroir-based appellations where the product will end up being an expression of the place, such that you can have the same exact cannabis genetics with the same exact techniques grown somewhere else, and it's not going to be the product.
Well, and that's like the varietals with wine, right? So
kind of, except that they don't really have those terroir-based requirements that international appellations of origin have.
Yeah, the irony was I was in Barcelona and I was at a club and the guy's like, I have really good California stuff. So like, I can't get it in Connecticut, but I can get it in Spain, so.
Yeah, I agree. When I was in Barcelona, California cannabis was considered like some of the best in the world, and I know there's that incredible demand for it. So when the Controlled Substances Act gets repealed and international and interstate commerce become a reality, there's going to be a tremendous demand. And all this cannabis that right now is kind of flooded the market in California, is just kind of stuck there. If it could get outside of the California legally and internationally legally, it would be an incredible boon to the California economy and to all of these like legacy growers and farmers who've been keeping the genetics alive and putting their freedom at risk to perpetuate cannabis culture during the height of the drug war. I think they need to benefit too. Like it shouldn't be that MSOs just come in and reap the fruits of their labor and leave them behind. That's been their MO many times. Not all, but you know.
And then going back to New York, based on what you're seeing, are they learning from the experiences from other states, or are they making the same mistakes?
No, they look at California as a warning sign
Okay,
basically,
good.
and it's like how not to do it is what California has become. It's almost like a running joke in other states. You know, California is an example of failure, and they don't want to repeat that. And you could see that with New York, for example. Like a lot of the local jurisdictions were far more open about allowing consumption lounges and storefront dispensaries. California has been. So, you know, now I think, you know, once they allow adult use retailers across the state of New York, very quickly there's going to be a lot more green zones than in California.
You know, and one of the things that we're seeing in New York, and this speaks a little bit to what will happen on the federal level, is just because it's been passed doesn't mean that it is operational, right? It takes years to work out the details. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, like even the quality of the product is going to be, you know, not the best that it could be right away because a lot of these like hemp conditional cultivators, you know, they're not used to growing cannabis. They're like hemp growers, you know, and so there's going to be a learning curve that will be reflected in the initial quality. And so as time goes on, the quality will be refined. But I think, you know, you raise a really good point, which is like there's a time to get up to speed, and in terms of quality, in terms of work, you know, working out all the kinks, figuring out regulatory compliance, having standard operating procedures that are very efficient and still compliant. That takes time to develop. You know, none of that comes right off out of the bat, and operators need to expect that they have to constantly adapt and learn. For me, that's what makes this practice of law so exciting, is that it's constantly changing. And you know, if you're a skier, you like fresh powder, right? You don't want to be like on covering that you can't really, you know, do carve your own way. And so with cannabis law, a lot of it is questions of first impression. They've never been appealed or litigated, and so it really is legal fresh powder, and that's what makes it very exciting.
And New York has been focusing on the restorative justices licenses initially. Is that working? Will that work?
I think it will work better than it has in other states because the focus really seems to be on making it work, and there's going to be a tremendous level of support from New York State government, where they're basically going to be renting out the locations and giving it, you know, leasing it to the applicants, but it's not going to be the predatory practices, the green premium that you see where landlords are basically upcharging everything just because it's marijuana. And so I think there is a good chance that the New York system will be like one of the best in the country, and that it's going to be a challenge for California for us to, you know, improve our dysfunctional system now that we have better examples out there of things that actually do work. I think that will be an impetus for California to improve.
Yeah, I actually was listening to a lawyer the other day who was talking about trying to get something licensed in LA. And like just the hoops and changes and all that was just like, you know, she was earning every dollar trying to get those licenses. You know, it was crazy. So what other areas beyond New York are you looking at?
We're looking internationally because we do a lot of intellectual property law, and so much of that IP law, you know, there's a lot of infringement that happens internationally. So you have to protect your trademarks, for example, by registering them in infringing countries like, say, China, for example. And so, you know, we're starting to look at international law in that. And then, you know, we write books. So, like, this is like my California book. And once the adult use regs get finalized, we're gonna be in
That's
a
a big
position to
book.
update it. Huh?
That's a big book.
Oh, So it's really not that big when you
Okay.
to the California book, which is a beast. Look at that. California
Okay.
has
Yeah.
100 pages of laws and regulations. And I basically wrote the book because nobody else was doing a good job. Like there's a company called LexisNexis that are legal publishers, but their book was oftentimes like not up to date with the latest. And so basically, I created my own tool and then started selling it to everybody. Um, and
And we talked a lot about the challenges in California. What are some of the other challenges you're seeing in the industry, obviously besides, federal legalization?
oh, the lack of retail access, lack of direct to consumer access, and these are things that people are working on. If we do see direct to consumer access where farmers can get temporary retailer permits for up to 8 cannabis events, then you'll probably see like a proliferation of cannabis events across the state. And by cannabis event, I mean like a place that's state licensed, or it's an event that's state licensed up to 4 days long, where adults 21 and over can buy and consume cannabis. And you're
So
going
a
to see these.
Lollapalooza of cannabis kind of thing?
Yes, yes, and that could also combine. It doesn't necessarily have to be concerts, although that's usually like the first, form that it takes. Like the Emerald Cup is usually like musical acts and cannabis vending and cannabis consumption. But I think eventually you'll see like cannabis comedy festivals, food truck festivals. I think there's tremendous potential for foodie type events because cannabis really pairs well with food. And
And there's munchies, so yeah, sure.
that's exactly. Um, and there may end up being like new, events like Coachella, which has now become kind of part of modern culture. It was kind of like a new event 20 years ago. It wasn't, what it is now. And so
Yeah,
I
it's
think there's
mainstream
going to
now,
be,
right?
yeah. And so we're going to see cannabis events that will end up becoming mainstream. Like the Emerald Cup, for example, moved from Santa Rosa to Los Angeles. At least the awards part of it did. And so I think there's still a demand up here in Northern California for an event that will be local for locals to celebrate local cannabis culture without people having to travel down to Los Angeles. And so that's an example of demand that's still unfilled for
And
events.
do you think like the cannabis cups are more sort of industry specific for like the insiders, or they're seeing the general public attending?
Depends on the area. Like like Santa Rosa, you see a lot of like kind of curious first timers and general public attending for sure. Like people from Walnut Creek and from San Francisco high society who probably wouldn't go to an event where they could be recognized. They travel to the Emerald Cup so they can participate in cannabis culture. So people from all over will do that. And I think, initially I went to the Emerald Cup back when it was up in home county in the Mateo, in a tent, smoking with a bunch of hippies. And so, that's when it was really like a B2B event and people were really like making deals in the parking lot. But I think nowadays it's more like a consumer facing event. And, there's a lot of cachet for those who win the Emerald Cup awards. If you're a grower and your strain wins the Emerald Cup, then that's a big accolade, and it helps you sell your product everywhere you offer it.
And there's been a lot of talk about sort of transitioning to brands, and like there's a big push for brands. Are you seeing this?
Oh
Is that
yes,
working?
it seems to be working. Building a brand takes time and creating that credibility, but we're doing a lot of intellectual property trademark registration work because California now registers cannabis trademarks. Asked us the state of New York at the state level, and then there's also federal trademarks. You can't trademark cannabis yet because it's federally illegal, but you can trademark hemp. And so many of my clients are trademarking using the intent to use application process. Hemp products so that nobody will register any conflicting marks before cannabis gets legalized. And so,
And you've been
yeah,
talking a lot about adult use. Do you do anything in the medical side?
of course. I mean, I started defending medical cannabis patients, and that was really the crux of my practice for many years. So I've had many conversations with medical cannabis doctors about medical cannabis conditions and what is the amount that is reasonably related to my patient's medical needs, because that was usually the medical defense. And so I have a deep understanding of medical cannabis, but as like a lot of the work that's getting done legal now as a business lawyer, it's not limited to medical. I do have clients whose focus is on medical cannabis because for them it's a passion, and we are honored to represent clients like that. But I would say the majority of people getting into the cannabis business and needing legal help are not medical only. They're looking at a broader market.
Omar, we very much appreciate your time today. If people want to learn what you're doing, where can they find you?
On our website, www.omarfigueroa.com, or you can just Google Omar Cannabis Lawyer. I'm the only one.
Omar, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. We look for exciting things from you, and keep up the good fight.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.